some of the things that we're doing moving forward. So I see some friends, Steve Bloom, right? I see Steve right there, and a few other people I know as well. But I think it's important for know a little bit of history of me, because it's kind of like I am the person that was never expected to be an entrepreneur. I was someone that was well, my story is that I was born and raised in a suburb just north of Chicago called Waukegan, Illinois. Graduated from high school in the mid 80s. And at that time, and from graduating, was the focus of most people was to go to college and get a job. So that concept of me, or this idea of me being an entrepreneur, and some of the work that we've been able to do over the last 27 years now, is pretty odd. So you never know, how you're going to be used, and what your goals or your outcomes may be. So that's a little bit about me. My wife and I just celebrated 26 years of marriage this past weekend. We're actually going to do a getaway, or try to do a getaway, or do something in the midst of COVID. We've been blessed with 3 children and a son-in-law. So my oldest daughter got married last year, a year and a half ago, I should say. So that's been an adjustment. But I do like him. He's a sharp young man, and yeah, we're a pretty tight family. And my wife is, just so you guys know, my wife's a public school teacher, so she's had to make a major pivot. She teaches music, and she's learning how to teach music online. Imagine that, to fit, to her kids who are in preschool all the way to K through 8. So in this period of time, like most entrepreneurs, we have to learn to adjust. So with that being said, that's a little bit of a history about me. The organization Entrenuity was launched back in 1999. I was a student that came out of Wheaton College. It's a school in the western suburbs of Chicago. And my goal was, and I actually, a little bit of history is that my advanced degree was in theology. And it's very interesting, because my goal was to literally take 2 years off, go get a PhD and teach at a university. That's what I thought I was going to do. However, the plans altered greatly. I ran into my wife, who was teaching us, running this program, and they said, hey, we need an entrepreneurship teacher. I didn't even know how to spell the word entrepreneur. Never heard of the word entrepreneur, but in order to be with her more, that's what I did. I became an entrepreneurship instructor, and was literally intrigued by the way that students were fascinated. These are urban youth on the west and south sides of Chicago. And I was blown away by what the students were learning, because of things that I never had learned, from graduating from high school, going to undergrad, and then graduating from graduate school. No one had ever talked to me or even told me about the possibility of running and owning my own business. So it was very intriguing to me. I saw the students that were immediately attracted, but also their families. And I made a commitment to myself and said, wow, if there's any way I could actually do this for a long time, longer than what I was doing from just running a program, I said I would do that. And here it is, 27 years later. You have to always be careful of the commitments that you make, and how we come to this point of launching Entrenuity. So that's a little bit of background about Entrenuity, a little bit about me. Entrenuity, again, was launched in '99. I had spent 7 years in the area of youth entrepreneurship instruction prior to launching Entrenuity. And my last job, actually, where I actually got a paycheck from someone else, where I did not sign my own paycheck, was in 2004. I worked for this organization called the Illinois Institute for Entrepreneurship for Education. And at that time, the abbreviation is IIEE. We were all expected to be entrepreneurial, meaning that we were all 50% employed. 50% of your time you got paid for doing your job. The other 50% of your time was free to do pretty much whatever you wanted to do. And in that time is when I actually launched Entrenuity back in 1999. And the goal was to be able to expand what I was doing from IIE, but also to do it more so with people who were involved with ministries and churches. So that's part of my background. That's part of who I am. And one of the things that became immediately obvious to me was there's a challenge that all of us in the nonprofit industry face, and I do call it an industry, is funding. And if you haven't experienced funding challenges, and just the whole issue of how revenue generation in order to fund your passion, your hobby, your interest. But for me, funding what I felt was my calling in the area of entrepreneurship, this was a major, major, major problem for me. And then, and I'm going to kind of walk through, a couple slides, that we've created talking about the problem. There's an acronym that I use called PSA, problem, solution, action. It's a play on public service announcement, but every problem has a solution, and there's a marketplace action that you should initiate to solve that problem. And so my problem, and I'm going to walk through this deck, I'm going to share my screen. Just a sec. And hopefully everyone can see my screen. My problem was that, let me just go to one slide. My problem for me, excuse me just a sec, click on this. My problem was that I was in an industry, as far as working with churches and in many ministries, where I was an African American. And there was a challenge of fundraising for me as a Black nonprofit organization. I did not have many connections. I had a passion, I had training, but I did not have a network to raise funds from. So what I focused on was my ability to teach entrepreneurship as a skill set that I have developed over a period of about 7 or 8 years. And then the action that I put into place was, how can I launch a model, an organization where my efforts to be able to work in the area of entrepreneurship education would not be limited by funding. I did not come from a funding background. I was not familiar with the nonprofit industry at that time and how it worked. And this was very problematic because I had a passion to serve, but I did not have the model, I didn't have the expertise, and I did not have the industry knowledge of how this actually worked. So that was my problem, and this in Entrenuity, in essence, became my solution. One of the challenges I was up against was that this comes from a study that we have completed from my recent book called No More Nonprofits: Moving from Dependency to Sustainability, was that the majority of revenue that for many of the organizations that I wanted to serve, a lot of the organizations were led by men and women that were Caucasian, that were set up primarily in a Black and brown community. And so one of the studies that we found was that, and we pulled this data off of about 16 different organizations in Chicago, not churches, but we pulled this data down and we found that the majority of revenue to be able to sustain and run organizations went primarily to white-led organizations. And you're seeing that number is exactly right. It was almost to a ratio of $35 million to 1.7. $35 million went to white-led ministries that were set up in the urban context that were led by white men and white women, and only 1.7 million went to Black-led ministries ministering in the same communities, often in the communities from which they were from. So here I am trying to figure out how to run a nonprofit organization with no connections and no revenue. And there's a significant revenue that was going to people that didn't look like me, that was set up in the community. And I still had to survive. So like any business owner, you had to figure out solutions. One of the reasons that we had to move forward with this was because, as you know, in any nonprofit, in any organization, you cannot keep, if the model is not working, you have to find a different solution. And so our solution became, for me to be able to launch, basically to turn the model of Entrenuity into almost like a for-profit model within a nonprofit organization. And we're going to talk a little bit more in a few slides about the 70-30 principle. But when I began to change and to shift my model, there was and this is obviously, looking back in more recent years, but we were always about a $300,000 to $500,000 organization. When we shifted to more of a model of where the nonprofit Entrenuity had more of a for-profit model of business ownership and buying and operating businesses, our revenue increased significantly. From almost about $500,000 to we finished with about $2 million last year. And one of the things that began to happen is the less dependent we became upon donor dollars. And believe me, we were never really that dependent, but the less dependent that we became, the more that donors and investors, because I often call our donors investors, were more willing to invest and put money into Entrenuity. So the less dependent we were, the more sustainable we were, we were that much more attractive to be able to essentially generate revenue from donors. You can also see that one of the key things is that we earned our own revenue through programming, consulting. I mentioned business ownership, and I look at investor support and as private donors and foundations. It's a very important point, and something that you'll see now, and something that it's interesting because years ago when I launched Entrenuity, people were saying, I was pushing the boundaries of what a nonprofit could do or should do. But now they gave me an award for, being a organization that is, sustainable through, at that time, primarily through most of our earned revenue came through our programming. And so as this model continued to evolve, we were beginning to attract more and more donors, like I mentioned earlier, to the extent where we've been able to do a lot more things recently, which I'll show in a sec. In fact, we'll talk about that now. Some of our revenue sources became one of the, as Angela mentioned earlier, we are literally building a co-working space in the South Loop called Mox.E. That's going to be on the second floor, and Mox.E exists to be able to provide enterprise level amenities to different entrepreneurs who need private offices, co-working space, open, phone booths, all those things. But this model is another example of a way to generate revenue for the nonprofit. Again, Mox.E is under Entrenuity, but at the same time, it's almost like an affinity organization that in which we will be able to provide the services, business level services that people will pay for. That in turn helps us to be able to run the nonprofit, the organization. We'll be launching in December 2020. So that's one thing that we are very excited about as well. And there's a whole story. If you know of anything about getting things up and running, there's always another story to it. But we've been blessed to be able to purchase a building in the South Loop in a prime market. When COVID hit, I'll give you an example. When COVID hit, we were able to leverage some of the equity that we have in the building to be able to help us survive and actually be able to grow and do a few other things that I'll talk about in a second. Our other location, not our other location, but Overflow Coffee Bar is going to be our coffee shop that's located on the first floor. And Carrie Pendleton is our coffee director. So, we will have on the first floor a craft coffee location. On the second floor, we'll also have the co-working space called Mox.E, two revenue drivers that help support the nonprofit Entrenuity, owned by Entrenuity, will help us to move forward. Last year, we were able to purchase another coffee shop called Common Cup. John Pendleton is our manager, happens to be Carrie's husband as well. He works for his wife. And this was owned by some friends of mine that had launched Common Cup about 10 years ago in Rogers Park. And they let me know that they were interested in selling. And we were fortunate enough to be able to buy the Common Cup. And so now we have two 2 coffee shops, and actually Common Cup is doing extremely well. A credit to both John and Carrie's leadership, even in light of COVID right now. And so these are, again, opportunities where the nonprofit can own for-profit businesses in order to be able to sustain itself. This is oftentimes, this is not done a lot. At least it wasn't when I first launched, but it's something that you're going to see more and more of now if you guys are not already doing it yourselves. And then the other tool that we created was and I'll give a demo of how one of our tools works, is called Starting Up Now. So I created our own curriculum tool. This is another affiliate organization that we launched, a for-profit that we launched. And that's where we have a lot of our curriculum resources that we not only use, for some of the work that we do, but also they're used both, throughout the U.S., several colleges and universities. And we've done training both in Canada, Brazil, and Mexico, but it's also being used in other locations as well. So showing you these things to say that there are ways we as entrepreneurs need to begin to think about, or nonprofit leaders, I should say, to think about where are the revenue opportunities in your marketplace. For me, it was obviously it was in the area of entrepreneurship first, creating this curriculum first, but then as the opportunities begin to expand, we had additional revenue. We were able to buy for-profit businesses, employ between both coffee shops, where you will employ about 20 people. Entrenuity as a whole employs, when we wrap all the businesses together, about 40 people, that we employ ourselves, when we look at all the different organizations. One of the key things that happened for us is that our revenue increased significantly as well. And one thing that, for most of my career, I've always been on the other side of not having enough money. And believe me, it's a lot better to be on this side when you have resources, because you can do a lot more. And so that's one of the, I would say, the benefits that we've earned over time. We've earned the trust of our donors, our investors, by us being able to deliver, us being true to our word. And believe me, there have been many mistakes that have been made. But the one thing that we've been able to find is that if we were truthful, if we were transparent, and those things created trust, we were able to develop what I call, relationships with key people, but also relational capital, in the sense that they not only trusted the relationship that we created, but they also introduced us to other people as well. As you know, business, whether you're on the nonprofit side or the for-profit side, works by relationships. So that's, where we are as an organization right now. We're looking to grow, we're looking to expand, and we've been able to, grow pretty quickly over a short period of time. Created about 19 or 20 different jobs. We have about 16 industry certifications, and we have different aspects of different businesses that we're involved in. So this model of the nonprofit, being dependent upon only donors, is not something that we've been able to necessarily leverage over a period of time, but it's something when you bring your donor, you bring your investor into business opportunities, we have found that they're far more interested in investing in opportunities that allow that are not dependent only upon their dollar. And so one of the things that I learned over time was the 70-30 principle. And this is something that happened when I first got started. I found that many of the organizations, when I would go to a donor, I would go to an investor, and I would say, hey, I could, let's say it was an after-school program. This organization or this school could come up with about 30% of their costs. Let's say their cost was $10,000 running an after-school program. But what you find, and this is something I would highly recommend as you guys, look at your organizations as a whole, is that I've found is that when I kept costs down, administrative costs and overhead costs down to less than 30%, and 70% of my revenue went directly to the organization or to the direct service, I was able to raise a lot more money because costs were low. And so I saw this begin to happen more and more and more. So every time I would go to, launch a program, I would go and raise, I would go to, an organization, say, hey, I got, an after school program here. We're going to work with 30 or 40 kids. I can, the school or the organization could come up with about 30% of the cost. And the donor would, I would ask the donor or the investor to say, hey, can you cover the 70%? Almost every time that there was involvement there's some skin in the game, so to speak, the investor or the donor was far more inclined to be able to support the program. And so this began to evolve so much to the extent where I moved it out of just programming, but it became the model in which I built Entrenuity's budget. And I kept costs down. I intentionally kept, now, to be truth be told, it didn't always happen every single year, but my goal was always to keep costs down to 30 to maybe 35% tops, because when I was able to do that, I was able to basically build my own sustainability. And the more sustainability we had, or I had at the time, the greater the attraction was for us as an organization to be funded by funders. And so, like in any business, you want to keep costs down, you want to keep revenue up. And that was a model that began to, I saw that develop over a period of about almost 7 to 8 years. So that's one of the things I always want to push, is that program-related income. You want to have 70% of that income going directly to the program, only about 30% going to operational expenses. And one of the ways that we did that was a tool that I use. And I just kind of do a quick demo. It's called the profitability tool. And the way that I was able to determine profitability was often by using a tool that we created as part of one of our resources in Starting Up Now. And I'll just do another quick screen share to show how this worked, because knowing how to be able to budget, not only budget for profit and loss, but also to cover your overhead expenses is extremely important. And I saw many nonprofits not being able to know what their real cost was, and they weren't able to do that effectively. So I'm just going to do like a 1 or 2 minute overview of how this tool works. So just a second, let's share my screen again. So hopefully everybody can see that. And this is a tool, and this is a demo tool that we run every program, or at least the program models that I come up with. It's called our profitability tool. And what I do is, I'm just going to walk you through the different worksheets. This is a tool that we built in the Starting Up Now, but it's basically a fancy Excel sheet. And what I do is I walk through, essentially what the costs may be for every model. For every expense in the program, including administrative costs. And that's typically done by these inputs on this screen right here. And of course, these are all made up numbers. I like cars, so we base it on a racing simulation. But what I do is I walk through whatever product or service, your organization is selling, whether it's a product or whether it's time, because you have to value time, which a lot of us don't do, is we basically put a value in for that. So for example, here's a rookie driver model. We're gonna sell 15 units of that. The cost is $395, but I know right here my internal cost for that is really $125. And so what I do, there's a cost, and then there's a value associated with every aspect of the program, including your contributions on this side of the screen. This is where you'll put your donors at. Here under general costs, these are, Lewis Hamilton's a famous F1 racer. And the top, one of the best, actually the best racer in the world right now. And if I were to get Lewis Hamilton to come and lead this class, I got to compensate him $10,000 and so on. And what this tool does, it allows me, on every program that I run, it allows me to see what the real cost of that program is. So here you have the project costs, our internal costs, and here there's any difference, or there's a difference I need to make up, I find out where that cost center is. And so I do this for almost every single program that we run, whether it be a small after-school program, whether it's a class that Angela leads for adults called Plan to Launch. This is a tool that we learn how to do. I mean, I learned how to do, with an intern. We created this with an intern with the intention that every program must be profitable. And so at the end, when I come back, I go back and when I basically use this tool to develop the model, this is what the client sees right here. He or she gets this document, this one pager right here. There's some other information that we give them as well, but they get to know, basically find out where all their cost center, where all the cost centers are, where the program is. But for me, on the back end, I know where all the expenses are. So this is a tool and a resource that, running a nonprofit, most of us have not had, at least for me, I can only speak for myself, but when I demo this to the others, most people have not ever done something like this before in running a for-profit and definitely not a nonprofit. But the goal is that we must become, if we're going to become sustainable, we oftentimes have to know where our cost centers are, where our revenue drivers are, and what it takes to become profitable. This, like right here, this green line right here, if the program is not profitable, it turns red and it tells me not to move forward with the program. Excuse me, Mike, just a sec. So that being said, I'm going to switch my screen back over to the presentation. And that's just a tool we can talk more about in the Q&A section. Just a sec. Sorry about the long pause. Here we go. So going back to the 70-30 principle, that is one of the tools that I use to be able to have, basically to build out this 70-30 principle, which is extremely important when for me as an organization that did not have a lot of capital to start, but having tools like that and models like that helped me to survive and grow as an organization. Also, I mentioned this earlier, and this is very important to me, is our character. Character-based leadership is extremely, extremely important, especially in our world and our culture today. But the one thing I learned very quickly is that in business and in the opportunities that I've been a part of, you always tell the truth. You do not lie, you do not scheme, you do not misrepresent. Always be transparent. In a nonprofit, most nonprofits, you have to be able to provide a 990, and if you get to a certain income level, you have to be able to have an audit. Those are the non-negotiables. I also recommend having an annual report, and this information should be readily available to your donor, to your investor, to anyone that wants to basically learn more about your organization. These are the non-negotiables. And then the last thing, truth and transparency lead to trust. And trust is earned over time. Make sure you're a person that does what you say you're going to do. Report your failures and your successes. And those are some of the things that we learn over time. Finally, and I always say this, is cultivating relational capital. And when you want to be able, essentially, if someone is interested in learning more about your organization, there's things that you need to be prepared for. Number one is that you must be able to essentially, what I recommend is that they're going to analyze your 990s, and so should you. You also want to be able to provide quarterly financial reports and submit them the first month after the quarter ends. This is how most businesses function. Definitely in the area of nonprofits, a lot of times I see nonprofits not providing sound financial reporting, and that leads to many, many problems. Also, you can oftentimes when you find financial problems, there's also problems with the organization as well. And again, ongoing communication, newsletters, emails, social media. Another key element that I did not put in is your board of directors. You have a board of directors oftentimes, and then you often have a board of advisors as well, something that most of us probably have. But you begin by creating those, in order to develop capital and creating relationships, it's a process that occurs over time. And finally, I'll skip those for now. But one of our this is Gerald Bell. He's from Davos, and one of the things that we discovered in I should say in my area of working in nonprofits is that we must be aware that we must become sustainable. We're going to, if anybody is interested in getting this deck, we'll send it out to you. But there are several resources that are becoming more and more readily available that are pushing nonprofit leaders to create sustainability. And you can have sustainability through owning for-profit businesses. So that's something I want you guys, don't always think that we have to launch, in order to do good, we have to launch a nonprofit. That is not always the case. What I like to think, what I like to present is that create a business model and a business plan to solve a problem. And if a nonprofit is the best leadership structure to do so, then move forward with that. But maybe it's not, and that's where you have to evaluate and say which legal structure is best in order for me to meet my goal or my objective. So, and here's some more tools and resources that we have with podcasts and those kinds of things. Adam and Angela can walk you through that. With that being said, I am going to stop my portion of the presentation and hand it over to Adam.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate you sharing all that. And just wanted to, one of the funny things always, I know moving into the nonprofit world is, the spreadsheets follow you from the for-profit world now. And I think that's, the new model for everybody, but it's really, really helpful to see that. And I know it's been helpful for me moving into the nonprofit world to know that we're still doing it on this side. So I've appreciated it myself. A couple questions that have already come in. There's one I think that I can take, and Brian, if you want to expand on it, that's great. But right before I get to the questions, I'm also going to push my first Oprah giveaway question to the chat for everybody. What year was Entrenuity launched? Anybody, first person to put that in the chat, we'll have a giveaway for you. So in terms of, wow, that was fast. Shayna, my goodness, you're quick. You were in my brain when, so let's mark down, Shayna wins the first one. The one question we got in the, that I think I can wrap up myself, the question of, donations coming into Entrenuity acting as investments in the for-profits, potentially. No, they don't. So anything that comes into Entrenuity as a donation or, excuse me, is, revenue produced within Entrenuity, that all essentially stays within that framework. We do have investor relationships outside of the nonprofit for some of the for-profit businesses, but those have to be very separate. So the difference between, you still have to maintain the integrity of the two legal entities. So if you have a for-profit that's essentially has like a nonprofit as one of the owners, a silent owner that receives, part of the revenue, that's okay. But things that come into the nonprofit can't act to sort of push ownership in the for-profits, because that would sort of circumvent essentially the 501c3 model. So you can't do that and circumvent the tax code. So don't do that. Wanted to also toss to you, Brian, and I'm going to be typing the second question into the chat while you do this. But Brian, while I toss to you one of the questions that came in, which is about the tool itself. So looking at, the 70-30 principle and then that profitability tool, people are interested in, how it operates, whether or not you share it kind of internally or externally. You talked a little bit about that, but then also where they can get access to it.
Sure. That's a tool that's part of our, what we call the Starting Up Now suite of tools. So that's just one of the tools that we have in there. What we'll do, if you're interested in learning more about that or learning about the tools itself, what we can do is create a trial version for you guys. So if you send your information to Adam or Angela in the chat, we can send an invite out to that so you can see how that tool actually works. It's pretty cool, actually. I mean, it's something that several years ago I demoed to a chamber of commerce, and if I would have had it in the position that I had it now, I could have sold everything I had, right there. Because a lot of times business owners, we know profit and loss, but we're not oftentimes tracking, costs as it relates to administrative. And that's a challenge for most nonprofits, is administrative costs. One of the other tools that we have is a simple tool called an audit, time audit. My team hates when we do this, but
Confirm.
we track our time. How is your time spent versus, even on administrative time? And we did this about maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and the amount of times that we spent in meetings, and oftentimes, not always interfacing with clients and customers, and even with COVID, when we were able to track that, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but I think almost 40 or 50% of our time was spent in meetings, which is not always the most productive, as many of us know. So, but if you're interested in that tool, we'll get information out to you. We can send a demo model over to you, and you can learn more how it works.
Yeah, and that time audit is onerous, but it is helpful to know that every time you're sitting in a meeting, you're paying everybody to be there. So you better make sure that it's worth the cost. So yeah, our Sun affiliate essentially kind of controls that tool, and we are making a way for everybody to access it. And I think eventually it'll be on your phone, but for right now, it'll be something you'll likely get through a computer, but we will send that out. I am going to send out the second giveaway question, number 2. This one's super easy. And Shana, you can't win. You're too fast, first of all, and you already won the first one. But I'm going to send that out. And while we're doing that, Brian, we're talking about, sort of people not necessarily having business backgrounds, who go into nonprofits. Wow, Siobhan, really, really fast. Goodness, you guys are quick. People who go into nonprofits don't necessarily have business backgrounds. How do you go about setting those up, just and creating those from scratch? Is it something you should do yourself? Do you need help to do it? Like, what do you recommend?
Yeah, I learned because I worked for almost, literally 7 to 8 years in the area of entrepreneurship education. And we were expected to be profitable, even though we were a nonprofit. So it was almost like on the job training, so I was responsible for a division. I had divisional revenue goals that had to be met, and understand that these are business people that ran this nonprofit. It was called, some of you may have heard of it, it's called NIFTY. Now it's called the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, but back in the day, it was called the National Foundation for Teaching Entrepreneurship. And so we always had a model of sustainability. We can say sustainability now, but 20 years ago, we weren't saying that. It was just called survival. And so we were expected to, your division was expected to be sustainable through the selling of products and services and running programs. So yes, you can go and learn in classes now. There's a lot of good YouTube videos and those kinds of things. But back then we didn't have that. You had to learn on the job, and you had to learn how to run a division. And so I learned by doing, by running the division within at NIFTY at the time.
Yeah, and one of the things too that we try to do internally is really take a lot of that history and turn it into the tools that we've created. Brian, you've created, and we extend out through the through the different kind of platforms that we have to make sure that anybody anybody that needs that information, if they can't get it anywhere else, can get it from us. Because we definitely, our heart really is to see business. We think of business and entrepreneurship as a tool. It's obviously can be good in and of itself, but it can also build people and communities, and that's something worth investing in. So we want to see people succeed in that. I do have another question, and while I'm reading that question, I'm going to send out the third giveaway question. And this one, I think you'll know it as quickly because you guys are crazy fast. Who can't win? Shana can't win and Siobhan can't win, although you guys are crazy fast, so we'll see. What are your thoughts on hybrid as far as having a for-profit business that designates a specific portion of profits to charitable or nonprofit organizations, like we were talking about before?
Yeah, I think there's a a combination. I don't think in our world today there is a limit. Now you have B corporations now, your traditional nonprofits as well. When we bought Overflow was set up as a what do we call that, Adam?
It's called
What was
the Low Profit Corporation,
yes,
L3C.
yes,
Yeah.
L3C. Which I don't like that low profit word that much because
Yeah, I
that's
don't either.
it doesn't work for us, and it doesn't catch on with a lot of donors as well. But I do think in today's world, you need to have multiple ways to create sustainability. That could be through a hybrid model as well. What Adam was saying, a perfect example is our coffee shops are set up as for-profit organizations, meaning that they are for profits, even though Entrenuity owns those businesses. Okay, so and what that means is it's that much more challenging to run. We have a bookkeeper, so she has to run the books on 3 separate companies. We pay taxes. When I say we, the coffee shops, Overflow and Common Cup, pay taxes like any other business does. Okay, the profits that are generated from Overflow and Entrenuity can come back, to the organization, but it's run just like a for-profit business where we pay payroll taxes and I think it's monthly or quarterly taxes, just like any other business does. So, that's one. I mean, I would say that's something that we all need to take a look at: is where is the opportunity? What marketplace opportunity do you have in front of you, and what's the best legal structure to set up to basically maximize that opportunity?
Yeah, that's the hybrid model can work really well, but you also have to be aware, which is, Brian, you've been doing this for a long time, and other people I think are going to start to catch on to it more and more, because it's valuable to be able to have separate entities that can sort of feed each other, and that's really great. So Steve, you did get it. Steve got 1449 South Michigan, knocked it out of the park. Very nice. Those are our 3 giveaway questions. You guys are quick. I do have one other question I do think is might be helpful, but we want to, if we can take it kind of fast, because Angela, I know you want to finish this up at the end with some announcements.
Yeah, we're good. Keep going.
Okay, good. So Brian, one of the other questions is, how do you go about dealing with potential board resistance to the idea of any, hybrid program, or any sort of mixing of the 2 worlds of the nonprofit and for-profit? How have you gone about dealing with that?
I didn't have board members I had board members that always believed in what we were trying to do. So the board members that I had really resonated with, they know my story, and they knew that I have never been able to, going back to my example, the challenge I had as an African-American trying to raise money in an evangelical context, they knew my story, and so we had to develop new models and new ways, just like today in COVID. People are having to find new models and new ways, and if you don't have those people on your side, and they may be resistant, maybe they're resistant because they don't know. Maybe you can school them up, and train them up, or whatever it may be. But if they're resistant because they're used to traditional models, and I can understand that. This is new. People warned me, years ago, Brian, you can't. They were literally telling me you cannot do this. And we, every year we filed our taxes just like any other organization does. And now, people are saying, wow, but because we had this model early is the reason why we have survived in many ways been able to thrive, because we did not adopt these models that others were saying what we could not do. So we were entrepreneurial at heart, and you get people who are entrepreneurial at heart around you. So our board does not consist of people who have what I call the nonprofit culture mindset. Many of the people that are on our board and advisory board, are business owners and business leaders themselves, and they understand the necessity of being around forward-thinking people and being able to create sustainability. So for me, I don't know. And they usually do not fit well on my board if they're not inclined, with our direction.
Yeah, that's great. And many hands make light work. If you have people who are pulling in the same direction, that's always better.
And let me say this too, real quick, Adam. One of our key investor donor, he recently said, I am not interested. Let me say this very carefully. He said he is less interested in giving donations to organizations that do not have some level of sustainability. There's, and that, when we send out the deck for those who are interested, we'll send out a couple links, because you're seeing this more and more and more, where people and organizations are having to create greater levels of sustainability, because number one, there's less funding in the market. People have a significantly higher debt load, so they're not always able to give. The government, depending on what's happening, who's in charge at that time, does not always have, does not have the funds to always give as well. So you can always exercise marketplace principles by creating a product or service that can meet a need that allows your organization to be able to generate revenue. There's not one person, or I shouldn't say one person, but most business owners and most of the people that we associate ourselves with, they very much understand that. So that's something that's very important, is to surround yourself with people who have your best interest and know who you are in mind.
Yeah, and appreciate that. And I'll say that's one of the reasons I wanted to work, with you, Brian, because in my mind, it felt like we could sort of take our own destiny in our own hands instead of waiting for somebody else. And that to me was always very, very appreciated. So thank you, Brian. Appreciate you sharing, and thank you all for your attention. Angela, I want to toss back to you and let you wrap us up here.
Absolutely. Brian, that was great. Like Adam said, I was drawn to Entrenuity years ago because of that essence of, we create our own way of sustaining ourselves. I came from a business background, so that was attractive, especially having a place on a mission. But we have some sort of control inside our organization. So I am the new Mox.E Director of Operations, and we're doing events like this to try to just share really strong, thoughts and ways of doing organization and business structure. And we're going to be doing more of these. So I just wanted to share a couple announcements, other things that are happening that potentially you would want to participate in and get to know. So let me just share my screen real quick with you. All right, it looks like I can't share my screen, but that's okay. So one thing is that Mox.E is opening in December. So Adam, if you want to share some of those links in there, basically I'm just going to show you what these links show. So at moxechicago.com, you can go on there, and we are going to be doing a free 3-month giveaway for an open co-working membership. So you can put in your address there, and just to keep up with the building updates. We're going through construction, it's going super well, and we're really excited to launch and have a place that can really be a hub for Black, Latinx, and women founders to come and to just find a community and to really grow their businesses and expand. And also, and for nonprofits too, since that's our heart, nonprofit and businesses. The second thing is our next event is in just a few weeks with Renita, who is a retired Air Force colonel. And she's going to be talking about how women can speak up in often male-dominated environments. And as a woman who has always worked often in male-dominated environments, it's important to learn how to speak and how to speak up. So that's going to be a ladies' discussion for all you ladies out there. We have our Capital Matchmaker event, which we are going to have just a few people live in person, but we're going to be making it available virtually. And that is an event where we have hand-selected 3 founders from Chicago. One of them is a Black African-American female who is going to be talking about a cyber technology firm. Another one is a sports technology firm led by an African-American guy who has created a really strong tech business, and we're excited to feature them. And another one is a Latinx guy who is has an app that works inside of the elder community, being able to connect nursing homes and the people inside of them with their families. So we're going to be giving cash prizes to them and being able to connect them also with investors. So we'd love to have you guys join that virtually to cheer them on. And lastly, we're going to take this session, as there seems to be a lot of interest in this nowadays, to actually have a full half day or even full day workshop in January. We know that there's a lot of questions and specific needs that come out of trying to make the shift into a for-profit, trying to have more of a revenue generating model for self-sustainability. So we want to be able to offer more hands-on help with that. So if you're interested, we don't have the finalized dates yet, but if you're interested, just click on that link and put in your information, and we'll give you more information later as we get closer. If you're interested in the tool that Brian showcased, just message me here, or you'll get a follow-up email from me as well, and we can communicate that way. And if you have any other questions, feel free to stick on for a couple of minutes afterwards. I'll just stay here, but otherwise, we just want to thank you for coming and giving us your lunch hour, and we will hopefully see you later.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.